6:02, and it is 6:02, and I will call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. And we will start off with noting that all committee members are present, along with Councilmember Watton and the mayor. Next thing is approval of the agenda. If there are not anything, if there's nothing that we want to change, then we will consider the agenda approved. And we will consider the agenda approved. And that takes us to public comments. I do not see any members of the public here in the council chambers to make public comments. Let's check online. I do not see any attendees either on Zoom. So with that, we will move to the approval of the minutes. If there are no changes, then we will consider the minutes approved. We will consider the minutes approved, and that takes us to the first agenda bill. Actually, it's our only agenda bill. AB 22-157, the annual floodplain management and repetitive loss plan. This is for presentation only. So who's going to tell us about that? Okay, Mr. Gamble.
50-50 chance.
Yeah, I'm way back there. Hello, is this working? Okay, just want to make sure. I'm Dylan Gamble, I'm Associate Planner, and I'm here to tell you about AB 22-157. And specifically, this is it's kind of a combination of a yearly public participation / public noticing process, as well as an opportunity for us to present the CRS project, I'll get into in a second, just to council and see if there's any questions about the process or the outcomes of them. The effort we've been going through this year is to publicly publicly notify all of the residents in the city that are within this listing category called repetitive loss. And so with that list, it's part of our, sorry, it's many acronyms. I feel like I was trying to wrap my head around it. So let me step back. The CRS program is the Community Rating System program. We use this system to try to get a reduction on our homeowners' insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, which is managed through FEMA. The CRS score that we get is a number between 1 and 10. The lower the score, the more discount that we can give to our citizens that have to have that flood insurance. It's optional if you own your own home, but if you have a mortgage, it's almost always a requirement. So it affects many people that are in the downtown historic district, as well as Meadowbrook Historic District and the surrounding areas, anywhere that's in the floodplain or floodway. The process involves a lot of policy work to make sure that we're achieving progress on reducing the likelihood and the amount of damages that the structures would take on if there was a major flooding event. So there's a lot of steps that the city can choose to take. Some of them are required, some of them are optional, and some of them provide us the best bang for the buck in terms of points and scores. And right now we're in between two processes. We have achieved our yearly recertification, and we are also looking into a document that we will produce called an RLAA, or Repetitive Loss Area Analysis, that takes all those properties that are in the not high rate, they have in the past actually taken a claim from their flood insurance. And they've done it either multiple times, but at least once. And so what we're doing is we're going to create a map that includes all those properties. We're going to have to go to them and get stakeholder feedback, so to speak, on how likely they are to elevate their home, the types of impacts that they've historically experienced, if they are the homeowner that would have experienced them. More or less do a survey, identify them, and then create a policy structure that will help us reduce the chance that they will have a catastrophic impact to their property. So that document will do two things. It will help us get a better score. There's a couple ways in which we could reduce our score, potentially bring us into a class 4, which we are currently in class 5. Class 4 and 3, they get more difficult as we go, and they become a higher burden on maintenance, but the opportunities that this RLAA will kind of satisfy a huge chunk of that for us and give us a really good will take some time. We're looking at working through this over the next year. And then there's a yearly recert, which is just a check-in, so to speak. And then there's a every 5-year class. That's when they would want to see exactly how all of our policy objectives line up, what number we actually get. We've historically been a 5 for the last several years, but with the completion of this RLA, we're hoping that we can reclass a better score, and that would be coming in 2024, which is good because we would need time to conduct this pretty extensive analysis to produce this score. So I guess that was a lot of details and a lot of acronyms, and so I'm happy to answer questions about how FEMA interacts with the city, how flood insurance works. To some extent, I'm not a super expert on the flood insurance part, but I can help clarify any of those details as well. And if you have any thoughts on the community rating system or how it works, I can answer those questions.
So how does this interact with the average floodplain elevation survey process? We've been through that, I want to say it's probably at least 3 years ago, where we were looking to reclassify, let's say, our floodplain elevation, floodway for buildable height, all sorts of things. How does this interact with that?
Yeah, there are definitely distinct products within FEMA, so to speak. I believe I understand is
It was an acronym.
an acronym. Yeah, a LOMAR or a CLOMAR. Yes.
LOMAR.
And those are essentially, for everyone, the idea is that FEMA will give us a number for our area. And that number is, this is the base flood elevation or the 100-year flood line, if you're to draw a line topographically across the river. And whatever falls within that is within our LOMAR number. So anytime we are looking to allow, for example, a commercial lot to be developed or redone in some sufficient way, they have to make sure that they're either floodproofing to the LOMAR, the base flood elevation, or above, depending on what they're doing. And it's very similar for a residential property too. If they, for example, were going to elevate their home in the floodplain, they'd have to go above that. We haven't, the LOMAR correction is a pretty substantial process to ask them to change it. We have tried to be diligent in that we ask for it only when we are very prepared and it will align with some other projects to make them go smoother. Specifically looking at the Sandy Cove, any work that happens in Sandy Cove, and the impacts that would have to how much revetment work we would be either required to do or allowed to do. And so we're trying to time the LOMAR review process with that project. It's still something we're looking forward to asking for, and we haven't conducted it yet.
So maybe,
not that I'm aware of.
yeah, so maybe this cycle through doesn't really align, but at some point, I remember the intention was, let's have a new survey done, set that base elevation that might be beneficial that could bring numerous properties out of either requiring flood insurance or being specifically in the floodway where they had no choice but to do mitigation if they wanted to do a remodel at home.
Right.
And that could then alleviate a number of folks from expensive remodeling and then improve insurance rates at the same time. So somewhere down the road, that's probably, I assume it's still
Yes,
hanging around.
it will be there. The reason we're targeting this RLAA process right now is because if we do not go down this road and we don't correct some of these repetitive loss properties in our policy structures, then we are at risk of losing our score status in our next research in a year. They will, because of some issues with how the hazard mitigation plan from King County and our annex of that document was reviewed by FEMA and then later re-reviewed, King County's document was found to be insufficient for that category of review, and all the cities that have a repetitive loss property number of 50 have to either conduct this document, this RLAA, or risk losing their score back to a 10. So we're trying to avoid both. It's a little bit painful in the sense that we have to go do something that in theory should be done. That King County's document should have achieved this for us, and we would say like, however, We're not in that position now, first, and then second, this will give us a chance to reduce the score in conjunction with the LOMAR. It will kind of do double work for us, and we will actually get a pretty good score boost, especially towards, this is a little in the weeds for CRS score stuff, but they have essentially milestones within it. So getting from a class 10 to a class 5 requires a big package of milestones. You have to conduct a hazard mitigation plan. A lot of policy work has to go out, specific, they call it out in their FEMA guidelines. And then below 5 is another big milestone mark. To get anywhere below a 5, you have to produce, you have to control or account for repetitive loss properties. Right now, our policies do not achieve that. So we would struggle to ever get to a 4 because we're not going to hit any of their milestone review parts, elements. I can't remember exactly what they call it, but it's a FEMA document and a guideline for FEMA. It's got a lot of acronyms as well, so I'm trying to recall them. But essentially, this would give us even a better opportunity to reduce our score in addition to whatever the LOMAR is likely to be an elevation reduction for us, whatever that elevation reduction in the LOMAR would give us. So this isn't wasted.
Is that really what the scale is? It goes 1 to 5 and then 6 to 10?
More or less, if you've done nothing to account for flooding impacts, you'll be at a 10, and you work your way down.
So there is like a 679.
There is 679,
Okay.
but because of those weird milestone review markers, they essentially, you get all this like bunching. Almost all the cities are either a 5, a 10, an 8, or a 2. That seems to be the milestone. Going from like a 2 to a 1 requires a lot of review. There's only two jurisdictions in the entire country that have a class 1, and they're pretty recent additions. They're both in California. I think Rosewood is one. Something else is a county in California, Northern California. But King County right now is attempting to get their score to a class 2. That's one of the goals. So if we are aligning, which we more or less are, we'll seek to try to go to a class 2 if it's possible. But a class 3 would be a pretty decent reduction. I think nearly 10 or 15% reduction on their flood insurance for anyone who has it.
Other questions? All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Campbell. And then we have a discussion item, which will begin with a housing needs assessment presentation. I guess that would be Matt Covert.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me this evening. Apologies, I'm fighting a bit of a cold or something, so if my voice doesn't carry very well or you have trouble understanding me, just let me know. Feel free to interrupt. I'm with LDC. We're the firm working with Snoqualmie on its housing action plan. I'm going to share a short presentation with you tonight to go over where that's at in the process, some of the main takeaways from the housing needs assessment, and sort of a first look at some potential actions that may end up in the draft housing action plan, which we're aiming to release to the community sometime in mid to late January. So I'll just share my screen here. Okay. Can everyone see this okay?
Good.
Okay. So I'm going to give you a brief description of the project purpose, the project schedule, the housing needs assessment overview, and then how that relates to the actions and strategies that we are in the process of developing for the draft housing action plan. For background on this, I think many of you have probably heard briefings about this before, but the legislative response to the ongoing and ever mutating housing crisis in the state in 2019 approved a bunch of funding to local jurisdictions to focus on options to increase residential building capacity. Housing action plans were one of those options, and they actually approved additional funding in 2022, which is where this project comes in. So This housing action plan is it's a bit unique because Snoqualmie went in on the housing needs assessment with 3 other cities, Carnation, Duval, and North Bend. The joint regional housing needs assessment that the FCS group prepared covers all 4 cities and contains all the necessary data for all 4 cities. But then each city is responsible for doing its own housing action plan because every jurisdiction is different, obviously, and issues that face one community may not be as big of an issue in the other. And so we are in the middle of taking the conclusions of the housing needs assessment, translating that into actions, and we'll be releasing and having a bunch of public comment period on a draft housing action plan in mid to late January. The deadline for completion because of the grant funding from the Department of Commerce is June 30th of 2023. So there's 2 key pieces to a housing action plan. There's the housing needs assessment, which I just described as regional in nature, but contains all the necessary data for all 4 cities. And it's really about understanding existing and projected housing needs for all income levels. And it requires that you document cost burden and household characteristics and workforce characteristics and a wide range of data. And then look at the potential for success in achieving planned housing types, land capacity analysis. The housing action plan itself takes off from that needs assessment. We're doing a bunch of engagement. I've had close to a dozen interviews with stakeholders in the community. And we're also working closely with staff. But the housing action plan is really a menu of options that the city can take. It is not a regulatory plan. It's not like a comp plan. It doesn't bind you to anything. So its success really is driven by coming up with a good set of options, a good menu or a good toolkit of options that the city can pull some levers to make a difference on housing. And it's also important to recognize that the city is only a part of the housing solution. There's only so much the city can do on its own, but the housing action plan is also an opportunity to have a broader public discussion about housing issues leading up to the comprehensive plan update, which is going to be getting underway shortly as well. So it's really a way of having some necessary conversations about housing issues. One of the main things that the comprehensive plan update is going to have to deal with in a way that's more engagement driven and non-regulatory. So it's really it's a great opportunity for the city. This is a brief look at the project schedule. So we started technically in April, but of this year, but we didn't really get underway with the needs assessment until July. FCS recently wrapped up the housing needs assessment, and we are currently in the process of not only translating those numbers into Snoqualmie specific data to be integrated into the plan, but looking at preparing some draft actions as well. And so mid to late January is the target for a council and commission briefing. And then the whole spring is going to be devoted to having public meetings and web feedback and some additional engagement opportunities, and the goal being that the council makes a decision on whether to adopt the plan or not by June 30th of 2023. So the housing needs assessment was performed at the regional level. Snoqualmie specific data, so we're kind of drawing those data from that report to focus in on some actions and strategies that Snoqualmie can take to address its housing issues. This is not for Snoqualmie. This is just a really great encapsulation, I think, that illustrates a lot of the issues that communities like Snoqualmie all over the region are facing. So these numbers will vary a bit from community to community. This was just a really great example that we found from a previous housing action plan. But the point really broadly stands here is that even in Snoqualmie, which is a fairly high income, high single family ownership community, especially compared to the other 3 communities in the region, there are still huge issues of affordability. So this graphic just shows, to kind of put a fine point on it, that that if you want to buy a single family house that is anywhere close to the median home region wide now, not just, this isn't specific to Snoqualmie, so the number I think is probably going to be higher for Snoqualmie, but you'd have to make in excess of 120% of the area median income, which is already a pretty high number. So you look at what people who work different jobs, make on average, and you look at something like an engineer or a marketing analyst, both of whom could potentially be in the market for a single family home. Unless they are, well, even if they're doubled up, even if they're in a household with another wage earner who earns that same amount, they still might not be able to afford the median home by kind of conservative assumptions in Snoqualmie or many other communities around the region. We look at cost burden in the housing needs assessment. So that's paying more than 30% of your income on housing. So that includes things like, for single family home, that includes not just the mortgage, but also your property taxes, your utilities. 76% of residents in the city of Snoqualmie are not burdened by their housing costs. That's more people not burdened than in the neighboring communities, which is good. But there's still 32% of renter households in Snoqualmie are cost burdened, which is a lot. That's a lot of households. That's a lot of people struggling to make ends meet in a time of inflation and cost of everything going up. Most housing units, as you know, are single family. Duval and Carnation have higher percentages of single family residences, but they are smaller communities overall. The median home value in the Snoqualmie Valley region has increased over 20% annually over the last 2 years, which is pretty wild to think about, but also not out of step with broader problems seen across the housing market in the region. And chiefly, and this is something that we've talked a lot with staff about, but Snoqualmie Ridge is nearly built out, and much of the rest of the city is constrained by the floodplain. So there's not a lot of real potentially developable capacity remaining in the city, which means that for doing something like this, to look at options to make a broader range of housing options available is going to be tricky. This is just some additional key pieces of information, and I think another item on your agenda is might be about the income band housing targets. This doesn't have to do with that necessarily, but I will note here that Snoqualmie is looking to need to absorb about 1,500 housing units over the kind of the forecast period, which is given the constraints that I just mentioned, is going to be challenging. So what do we do about it? Action plan, strategies, and actions. So we think of strategies as buckets of actions that kind of all are variations on a particular theme. So strategies that have been successful in other communities that have done housing action plans that we've worked with include a wide array of actions that preserve rental housing, incentivize new housing construction of all types, encourage a wider variety of housing types through things like changes to code, prevent and mitigate displacement, bring down the cost of development, and improve the regulatory environment for permits. Not all of these are going to be equally weighted across the plan because there's only so much low-hanging fruit available, and Snoqualmie's code is pretty good, but there's a few opportunities for improving things from that standpoint. And as I mentioned, we've been discussing a lot of this with staff and also with members of the community. Like I said, I've done closing in on a dozen interviews with folks from senior center folks to the tribe to builders, and this is baked into the grant, by the way. We have to do this kind of engagement, and combining the kind of the low-hanging fruit that staff was able to help us get through and some suggestions and ideas that came out of those discussions I've had with folks. This is just a very preliminary list of specific actions, and what we'll do is, once we kind of settle on a universe of actions and make sure that we're covering the bases for all the different types of issues that Snoqualmie might be facing, is we'll do a 1 to 2 page summary of what okay, here's this action you could take. Here's what it would do. Here's kind of the pros and cons. Here's what other communities have done. So, you know, making sure that you're not taking a step into the unknown. And then the last step is before final adoption is kind of figuring out an implementation strategy. So looking at, you know, what can be done now versus what's going to have to wait for until after the comp plan, for example, or until funding cycles. So there's various kind of variables there to deal with. But that's kind of once we have all these actions, it's really about figuring out a game plan for how some of these can be done. Next steps. So we're going to be completing the housing needs assessment specific to Snoqualmie, which is kind of drawing the conclusions and data out of the regional document. And we're almost done with that. And then complete stakeholder interviews, which should happen probably sometime in the next week or two. And then we're also getting underway, getting some of these actions written up, and at a very preliminary level, I'm just kind of, you know, sifting them through discussions with staff and getting those into something that can be released to you and to the public in mid to late January. Do you have any questions?
Too many questions.
Yeah. How do we do all that?
Yeah. Yes, please. This is a question. I don't know if I have any questions. Let's get on with it.
Yeah.
We, as a community, I think as several council members either have work in areas related to housing or participate in activities related to housing or have a passion for understanding the problem we have with and you touched on it perfectly, Matt, which was we have a high income wage community that we know has difficulties with folks that don't make that can't afford that home that our community has on the market. And it's the lower end that I'm most concerned about. It's the grocery store clerk and the police officer and the fire department, you know, trainee, or the assistant planner, things like that, that can't afford to live, that have to drive and can't afford to live in their own community. And I think that's the thing that so I'm kind of saying, let's get on with it, and let's get to some solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you.
One of the slides that definitely piqued my interest was the one related to the cost of a home that someone could afford at the different income levels. And even at 100% AMI, it was something like $300,000. You barely get a condo.
Yes.
I don't think you can. Yeah, you're right. I was thinking about Arch. Some of the Arch homes still are at that range. But yeah, those of course are restricted. So yeah.
The habitat houses, I think you get that.
Well, and now with interest rates at 7% too, that number is of a home you could afford is probably lower. So yeah, the problem has only gotten worse.
I was also wondering if you had two parents working and they had to send two kids, say, to daycare. Does that factor into this? Because the daycare is going to be more than the mortgage. Don't ask me how I know that.
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, it does not include that. What this basically reflects is the kind of the 30% rule. But there's a lot of issues with that. That's kind of the federal definition, so we're a little hamstrung by it. But it's worth noting that you know, that's what's considered affordable is technically like your gross rent, 30% of your gross income, which, you know, is not your real take home income. And then you factor in daycare, which, yeah, if you've got two kids in daycare, that'll easily run you, you know, $3,200. So it's not a pretty picture for housing affordability, especially on the kind of 80% and below.
Yeah, I agree with Joe, the daycare, to raise your number of daycare by probably another $1,000.
Yeah.
You know, and I can't speak for every family, but my family, we actually did the cost analysis and decided it was a better deal for my wife not to work than it was to put kids in daycare, which was a terrible thing. Well, it's a great thing for the kids, but a terrible thing for how, you know, how disjointed things really are in terms of incomes and costs for our community. Yeah, I think I'm personally, as a, you know, 20 plus year resident in Snoqualmie and seeing the growth and seeing everything's happening, I'm really most interested in the 30%, 50% lower AMI and the strategies around making that affordable for developers to build it and then keep to having it available at that lower rate. We've done recent deals at 80% and partially at 60%. And, you know, a lot of people still can't afford that because they make just enough to not qualify, and it puts them, instead of qualifying, it puts them into the local market, and then they really can't afford it. So they make just enough to not qualify at the 60% range, but not enough to be able to afford if they don't get in at 60%. So it's really, you know, trying to think about how we take care of the lower levels first, and then at those that they can't, you know, they're just missing the qualifications to get a lower rate, to get lower rents, better rates on the mortgages, all that sort of stuff. I mean, you know the issues. Just talking about it again, because I love talking about it. All the things.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. That's really helpful.
I didn't do daycare.
Do we have any other specific questions here for Matt?
So next time we hear from you is January.
Yep, mid to late January.
Excellent. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that I think we're going to do locally is do the buildable lands study. So does that, Matt, do you do that as well, or? Yes, okay.
Yeah, so the buildable land capacity work is we're going to have to see how that works out with there's a separate grant program for middle housing versus this, kind of where that gets done through, but that'll be part of the broader category of work here. And that's just looking at what was listed as having capacity in the latest year those data were collected, which I believe was 2019, and then accounting for anything that's happened since then and anything that's in the pipeline, and then kind of doing a gut check about you know, the shape of the land that's actually available and whether or not it actually makes sense to call that buildable. You know, sometimes you get, like, in terms of mapping, you get little slivers of stuff that shows up as capacity, but it's not really real. It's too weirdly shaped. There's a wetland or the floodplain or something, and so kind of ground truthing that and coming up with a what's actually available in the city to account for future projected growth. And I have a strong suspicion, as I believe Emily you do too, that there's not going to be a ton of there's not going to be a ton of room there.
And that includes the urban growth area, correct?
Pardon?
And that includes the urban growth area?
Yes. There's some in the urban growth area. It's not a ton.
Oh, I'm just running up.
Oh, okay.
But Matt, you could stick around for a few minutes if you want to just listen in, if you're available for the extension of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Actually, speaking of daycare, my wife just got home with my daughter from daycare, so I'm going to go check in with her.
I know the feeling. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Yeah, so our next item is going to be a projected housing needs and allocations update, and the opportunity for staff to tell us kind of where we're at with the numbers, and hopefully give us a few ideas for where we can go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My name is Emily Arteche. I'm the Community Development Director, and I'm here tonight just to give you an overview, maybe allow you the opportunity to think and ponder some of the changes that have been happening at the state. The Growth Management Act requires that comprehensive plans contain mandatory elements, and one of those is the housing element, which we've been talking about tonight. It's contained in RCW 3670A0702. And the requirement to have a housing element's been in the Growth Management Act since 1990. However, there's been some recent changes that we've been talking about. House Bill 1220, adopted or passed in 2021. And there are several requirements that will be needed to be implemented into our 2024 comp plan, which we've been talking about again tonight. And you may be asking, well, what's new, what's different? Well, the housing element now includes requirements such as housing allocations by income band and racial, we say this word, disparate impacts. But for the purposes of our discussion tonight, I just wanted to focus on the former. House Bill 1220, required the Department of Commerce to forecast what we're calling affordable projected housing needs or projected needs for the state. And that includes units for moderate, low, very low, extremely low, and emergency housing, including shelters and permanent support housing. So a portion of the projected need was provided to King County, and in turn, a methodology was established to share the need amongst the cities in our county. Please note that the projected needs from Commerce haven't been finalized. They're kind of holding off at the end of the year until they get these adjustments from the 2020 census data. So that may fluctuate, change a little bit. But nonetheless, the projected need was pushed out to the county, and a methodology was developed, now referred to as option 3, and it's moving through the county approval process right now. This option 3 will require our city of Snoqualmie, to not only accommodate growth targets, which were established a few years ago, but also to accommodate growth for housing by income band, including, let me just say, the option 3 focuses, there's 3 options, 1, 2, 3. Option 3 focuses on percentage share of housing that's currently affordable at 0 to 80% AMI, a percentage share that's currently income restricted at 0 to 80% AMI, and sub-regional ratio of low-wage jobs to low-wage workers. What does that really mean in number of units? Well, Snoqualmie, that would mean at 0 to 30%, that's 749 units. At 31 to 50%, 232 units. At 51 to 80%, 77 units. At 81 to 100%, 58 units. And then from 101 to 121 plus, 384 units. And then I should add that we have emergency housing needs slated at 279 units. That's a lot of numbers, and you don't have your calculator out, but yeah, so he was close, for sure. We do have some growth already in the pipeline. We have some projected growth. You just mentioned, Millside, and we do have a recently submitted last Snoqualmie Ridge plat that's in the process. But we do have a deficit already kind of pending about how we would squeeze in just the growth targets, not counting the projected need. So this is discussion opportunity. I mean, there's no solution today. I can tell you that, I'll just remind you again, that projected needs not been officially approved by Commerce, and that Commerce is coming out with some guidelines for cities like Snoqualmie about what are they realistically expecting cities to do, because we are not alone with these large numbers at these low AMIs. Other cities have similar and even more challenging units to address. One other thing I should mention is that it's clearly been stated that our city, no cities are expected to actually build these units by 2044. And there's probably an opportunity for us to continue to request that this projected need be reanalyzed on some sort of cycle basis. That, a projected need is projected, and they're going out to 2044. So what's realistic? Do those realistic numbers, they change in increments? So we don't have to build it all. It could change based on, Commerce's census data could change as they reevaluate these numbers, and everything is a bit of a moving target. And we don't need to build to it, but we do need to demonstrate that we can do it. And in order to demonstrate that we can do it, we not only need to meet Commerce's requirements, but we're very likely to go through more stringent requirements at the county level, including what they call a separate checklist. So somebody at the county level will be, kind of honing in, zooming in on Snoqualmie and just kind of verifying, gut checking whether or not we made a real attempt to try and meet the numbers. And I don't know exactly what criteria they'll be judging us on. They're coming up with that right now, including changes to the countywide planning policy, which will be really informative to us of how challenging will this be for us to meet. They even have some optional kind of sanctions in the works. I don't know if that's the right term, but GMPC is our governing management body at the county, and they could come down on a city if they feel like the city isn't being responsible enough. In the past, they called this kind of procedure reasonable measures, something like that. So, yeah, I mean, we've got not only our own, challenging growth management or, growth targets, but we've got, things going on at the county that are changing and things that are going on at the state challenging. What do we want to do as a city to help address this? And I think that's where the council can come. Snoqualmie City's got a lot of ideas. Councilmember would say, I think we could really deploy your ideas. The staff has some ideas, and some of them are mentioned here today. You saw that list of strategies. We also have middle housing going on right now. It's a separate grant. Middle housing provides the opportunity for a variety of housing types to be, looked at. And there's also an opportunity maybe at council and another discussion to talk about what's going to happen with the mixed-use final plan amendment and opportunities in the ridge. Are there redevelopable opportunities that come out of our buildable lands analysis? So lots of things to consider. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast or too much, but please let me know if I can answer any questions. I do have Jason and Dylan here. They're also helping part of the team on the comprehensive plan. So
Great. Same conversation we just had.
Well, I was going to say,
Yeah,
perhaps you can talk about the letter that we did send to the Department of Commerce and our conversations with them.
right, yeah, and Mayor Ross, please feel free to fill in as needed. But the city did initiate a valley-wide effort to provide a statement back to the Department of Commerce regarding this projected need. In it, the city was very clear, and the other valley cities echoed similar comments that this projected need is too much, too fast, and there are very little resources available for us to deal with it. And that is compounded with the fact that the city doesn't have enough infrastructure in place, enough urban services available, transportation facilities, and support around the lowest of the income bands for affordable housing. So we put that message back out to the state. We actually got an immediate response back from them and started an ongoing discussion with them that may help facilitate another result. So we're working with the state of Washington. They're going to actually employ that the county gets on board with this discussion. One thing that's clear in almost all of this is that water rights has become a unique identifier, different than the rest of the cities in the urban growth boundary, and that these cities in the valley are completely disconnected from the urban growth boundary. We have an urban growth boundary. It's not linked and we're not contingent to the other urban growth boundary. So perhaps, at a large scale, these kinds of things were missed or not considered, but we're bringing it to their attention.
Not so far. I do think that at some point, you can maybe fill us in a little bit more on what the staff was thinking, but at some point we're gonna, I think, be requested to give some guidance to the Planning Commission in terms of the kinds of policies that we want them to follow. So kind of giving them some direction of some sort, instead of kind of just saying, well, planning commission, try everything, see what happens. So I wonder if maybe staff can speak to that a little bit about
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You know, the 2024 comp plan amendment, you know, we've got kind of a soft launch going on right now, so we're assembling our teams and our consultants and working through these grants, and you'll see, you know, more movement through this committee to the council on those monies that we're receiving and how those scopes of works are going to be deployed. But yes, the planning commission will be charged probably with the housing element and the land use element simultaneously, and all these elements kind of work in harmoniously together. And we want to provide guidance to the planning commission, enough so where they can develop good goals and policies that you as council will appreciate. And, you know, the intent here is let's not have them go back and rework something. Let's have enough guidance to them to allow them to do the work and get you a product that you're going to enjoy. Yeah, and I think here that the challenge is that this is something that no city has ever been faced with their comp plan update since GMA was created. How much more creative can we get? What land use assumptions are we going to make? What potential strategies do we have in place that will meet the needs of the state and get us through a periodic review update at the county level?
One thing that Spokane recently did was they eliminated the restrictive single-family home exclusive zoning throughout the entire city. And what that does is it doesn't require them to get rid of single-family homes. No one's going to get forced out of their house. But rather it allows someone, if they own a property and they want to develop it into something that's, say, a couple of townhomes right next to each other, or a duplex or a fourplex, something like that, that they're allowed to. They aren't prohibited. And while that alone is not the thing that's going to address some of, especially these lower income numbers, what we can do is we can start looking at some policies for a percentage, kind of like how we did it with some of the other recent developments that occurred in the city, where a certain percentage needs to be in certain ranges. So if there was going to be some sort of redevelopment at that level, we could have those kinds of limitations. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious if we know or if we're planning to find out. I think a significant part of the city is deed restricted and under the control of the Ridge Owners Association. Basically prohibits, like, we could pass all kinds of permissive things, but I think they prohibit it. So
SR1 and SR2 are different.
I'm just curious how.
Yeah, we'll need
I'm
Bob.
just curious how the anything we might do. Just curious how that would interact with their rules. Is that something to look at or
Yeah,
find out
we
about?
should look at that. There's a difference between SR1 and SR2. SR1 is conditions of approval. SR2 is DA, in a nutshell. So there might be opportunity. I think the buildable lands would be really informative. We haven't done one in a long time. Where are those redeveloped properties? You know, if we could, you know, would we want to consider upzoning there and absorbing some, you know, perceived growth? Would anything happen? You know, it's all market driven. Maybe not. You know, maybe we could look at the PAA as well. You know, contingent zoning. That's something that the city hasn't employed yet, but other cities do that. They contingent zoning. They kind of set the rules up ahead of time. You know, might be a good way to demonstrate to the county and to the state that, hey, we're serious. Here's what we're able to do. And then you saw that list of strategies that we haven't even tapped into. One of those is multifamily tax exemption. What other properties would we want to designate? You know, we have some city-owned property. We could squeeze a bunch more in there, you know. It's not built yet. They're not expecting us to build it, but we could demonstrate.
So it's interesting that Joey mentioned Spokane, because I have 4 projects with a client prohibiting their own properties due to the change in regulation. The state of California recently passed legislation that eliminated the need for an existing property to be on site to add an ADU. So they now allow you to build a duplex on a R2 zone property and add 2 ADUs from the beginning. You don't have to have an existing building anymore. You can tear it down. It could be a tear down. It could be whatever it needs to be. There's 4 units on a residential lot. we've got developers, the single developer we're working with, is looking at 1,500 properties in LA County.
Yeah, and
do
ADUs
that
was on those list of strategies with the caveat, like maybe there's a way to keep them as ADUs, not short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Right,
definitely.
and that's exactly what he's doing, is he's looking to build it as Section 8 housing, so it becomes Section 8 qualified, and then he can operate as affordable housing in the state to help fund that way. There's endless, I mean, we could talk for a long time about all the methods at which we do. It really comes back to the buildable lands, what can we build on? And it comes back to urban growth area and what the state, how much
What we,
accommodate.
yeah, well, buildable lands is a combo of both redevelopable and vacant. So there's a methodology proven, it's been used, we can abide by that formula. I've actually done it myself several times. So, but that will be the real truth in kind of finding out where are those properties, and we're very fortunate to have LBC on board to continue on with governmental housing and buildable lands.
Yeah, it's a complicated, because it goes into, you mentioned water, you mentioned, environmental issues, you mentioned, there's density. We went through on a couple properties locally, the form-based zoning back in 2017,
Yeah.
16, 17,
Yeah.
as a test to see what would happen. I don't think anything other than one project was built on that, on that program. I don't think it's a bad program. I think it just needed a little kick to get, and it really comes down to finding those developers that are willing to either have a tax exemption or see the return on investment to do what they're looking to do. And our challenge locally is the either rent or return rate of what a developer would make coming back on selling or renting. And it's got to be something that it just isn't going to come back at an amount that they could sell it for would make their return without having huge subsidies. I don't think as a city we have that sort of capabilities. Maybe we do it from a state or a county level.
My thought is, getting this guidance, these official guidelines from Commerce will inform us about how hard we'll have to drill down to that level of specificity.
This is all part of building into the comprehensive plan.
Yeah,
Issuance.
yeah, that's
about
the
building it in.
radical change with House Bill 1220.
Yeah.
Never have we had so much emphasis on housing ever before. Now it's become an entire work program almost on its own. You can see we got nearly 3 grants going for housing, whereas, we have money set aside for the comp plan, but it won't cover all of them, considering all the extra work involved with housing.
Yeah, because you build 1,700 units of housing in the next, just say 20 years. Well, then you need the commercial industry to support that. You need the jobs to support that. You need the schools to support that. That brings more families and more, density in your school, and then all of it just sort of builds on itself.
Yeah.
But if the growth, if the Growth Management Act and all those things don't really give you the ability to go into your UGA and go there, then you've got to balance it all out.
Yeah, and we are considering that rebalancing. The city's even come forward to the county and say, hey, maybe there's some land that needs to be moved out, of the UGA, and other lands put in, considering, what's happening up here, Salish Lodge. Perhaps there's additional lands that could come in with, the diverging diamond, which would allow some housing to come in. Maybe the city gets really specific with what, to do with those properties. Maybe contingent buildings put on those properties in advance, with other information that guides future development. So, and there is one property just, within the urban growth boundary, that's undeveloped. And so that has an ordinance about maybe the city needs to reconsider what that ordinance, or I think it's an ordinance resolution, says about it. Because right now it's very specific about what you can do. And maybe the city needs to realign to help to meet the need that's before us right now. So I think, coming back to you with more information, ongoing, continual, will be the best way for us to solve this issue together.
The only other point that I wanted to perhaps add to what Councilmember Lissay was saying is not only does it have to be probably better than breaking even for the developer, they probably are going to want to make some sort of profit Yeah, probably. But again, they also have to be allowed to do it. And if
And
you tell them that they can't do it
That's key.
anywhere,
Yeah, I think the
that's a
latter,
problem.
what you just said is probably more important. The state can't probably do much on the former, but the latter, we have to remove those barriers.
Right.
Or restrictions or anything that may prevent a developer from coming in. And the guidance will come, probably in January from Congress with what that really means.
Well, you have my commitment to supporting and helping, and whether it's industry knowledge of working in the affordable housing area and doing housing for multiple clients and the kind of strategy that they go to, or coming up, what that missing middle typologies could be and sort of things that we do from my private sector work. More than happy to assist in how we get that happen. So Snoqualmie is too special a place to not give that whole support. So, very happy.
Any other thoughts? If not, we are at the end of our agenda. So without any further business, I'll go ahead and adjourn us at 6:58.